Good morning. Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to another edition of PT on Ice. I'm coming to you a little bit earlier this morning because I'm on my way to Las Vegas for the Ice Sampler. Really excited to be heading down there, meeting up with the rest of the crew, and we should have a great weekend of learning. Once again, my name is Jason London. I'm a core faculty with Institute for Clinical Excellence and teach the rehabilitation of the injured runner as well as clinical bike fitting. And today what I want to touch on is foot strike with a running athlete. And does foot strike really matter? So foot strike is pertaining to what is the position of a runner's foot when they're first initially contacting the ground. So there's three main patterns that we can have. We can have a heel strike or a rear foot strike, where it's more of the heel of the runner is hitting the ground first. We can have a midfoot strike, where it's what you would expect, just the middle of their foot hitting the ground first, or a forefoot strike, where someone is more up on their toes. And a lot has been said regarding strike patterns and injury rates, but the research really isn't maybe out there as much as one would think. So some physical therapists and coaches really try to address injuries through running mechanics by just changing foot strike, and is that really a good approach to do? Well, unfortunately, if we really look at the research, there really isn't a difference in injury rates between heel strikers, midfoot strikers, and forefoot strikers. Dan Lieberman, who kind of came out with one of the landmark studies looking at barefoot running versus shod running or running in shoes, and the differences in mechanics in that, as well as as extrapolating from that potential injury rates, and thought maybe injury rates would go down in barefoot runners versus shod runners, was looking at the vertical ground reaction force between barefoot runners and shod runners, and seeing that the loading rates were much higher for shod runners versus barefoot runners, and noticed that also that barefoot runners tended to land with their forefoot strike, whereas shod runners tended to land with a heel strike, and thought that maybe that had something to do with the loading rate. But really it seems to be more that rear foot runners or heel strikers tend to overstride and land further out in front of their center of mass, and that contributes more to that increased loading rate than necessarily the foot strike pattern that you're seeing. So the foot strike pattern that we see a lot of times can just be a manifestation of what is going on with the rest of a running gait. And looking at this, that's what kind of brought on all the different types of shoes that we have now versus kind of a traditional running shoe that has a 12 millimeter drop, basically a higher heel on it, a cushioned heel to accommodate a heel strike, with going to a minimalist shoe where we have a zero drop or really no difference between the forefoot and the rear foot in terms of the amount of padding, and that is thought to encourage more of a midfoot or a forefoot strike. And again, early on, people were thinking that, hey, if we can just get everyone to get in these minimalist shoes and adopt more of a midfoot or a forefoot strike, we'll see injury rates go down, since injury rates are just so high in runners. A recent study by Greer, which was a military study, had over 1,000 participants or subjects, found that there was no difference in injury rates between people who use a traditional running shoe and a minimalist running shoe. What we do see, however, is a difference in injury patterns in people who are forefoot strikers versus midfoot strikers versus heel strikers, and really more forefoot, midfoot strikers versus heel strikers. And we see a shift from knee injuries in heel strikers to more injuries to the foot in forefoot strikers and midfoot strikers. So just simply trying to change someone's foot strike pattern in terms of trying to address their injury and address their running mechanics, unfortunately, is not going to typically give you the results that you want. What you really want to do is look more at their stride length and have them try to adjust their stride length, particularly in the the first half of stance, and shortening that stride length so they're landing closer to their center of mass, so that they have to have less eccentric control from the hip stabilizers to have their joints in a better posture with running. And then just see what the resulting change in their strike pattern is. And people can certainly run with relatively low loading rates and ground reaction force peaks with a heel strike pattern, just as well as people who forefoot strike can certainly overstride as well. So just want to touch on that. There's a lot out there, a lot of people thinking that if they just change someone's strike pattern, that could solve their problems, just like others have thought, well, if I can just change my shoes, that will solve my problem. And unfortunately, it's not as easy as that. But if you have more interest in that, in looking at running mechanics, please either hop on a flight quick to Vegas and come join us for the ice sampler this weekend, or come check out one of the Rehab of the Injured Runner courses. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend, and we'll see some of you in Vegas.